Welcome to the Healthy You podcast. My name is Jon Hillenbrand. This month is Diabetes Awareness Month, and in that vein, we've decided to rerun one of our old episodes called My Broken Pancreas. This is one of my favorite episodes because it's got a lot of drama, it's got some humor, and it's just intensely personal. So give it a listen, and if you hang out until the end, you can get some more information about how you can help fight type 1 diabetes. Here we go.
We were anxiously waiting in our hotel room for my husband to finish showering so we could head to the amusement park. My daughters, tweens at the time, started yelling, "Hurry up," over the hiss of running water. But just as I finished my cheap shot about him taking longer in the bathroom than a woman, my heart sank. It suddenly dawned on me that my husband, a type 1 diabetic, might not be soaking in the shower but languishing in there. He could be suffering from low blood sugar, which would make him unaware of where he was, confused and unable to help himself. My pulse was racing, my hands shaking, and my thoughts were snowballing. I opened the bathroom door, but he slammed it shut. I heard loud banging as if he was punching the wall. I opened the door again and found him in a full-blown grand mal seizure. That dreadful sound was his head knocking against the wall. "Is Daddy going to die?" My youngest daughter cried out. "Dad's going to be fine," I answered way too cheerily. I embraced him in a bear hug and dragged his soaked, flailing body out into the carpeted foyer where my daughters saw their dad, naked and unconscious. I ran to the lobby for help, leaving my daughters stock still, staring at their defenseless father. Welcome to the Healthy You podcast from North Shore University Health System, where we explore trending topics in healthcare. I'm Carolyn Starks.
And I'm Jon Hillenbrand.
The story that I just told you happened to me and my husband, Jon, who has had type 1 diabetes since he was 16 years old. So 40 years.
Yeah, it must have been terrifying.
It was. And unfortunately, it wasn't the first time he had experienced blood sugar levels that low that he passed out.
Wow.
But while we were in the midst of all this turmoil, this was like more than 10 years ago, we learned a lot about these episodes. And that Jon was probably injecting insulin before he jumped into the shower.
Mm-hmm.
So the hot water was opening up his blood vessels and the insulin was getting into his blood very, very quickly. And thankfully now he's been using an insulin pump now for a while, and which delivers the insulin. And then he also wears a continuous glucose monitor. So this tells him when his blood sugar is going low or high, and it kind of gives him a reading like almost every 5 minutes.
Oh, that's cool.
So it brought a lot of peace of mind to our household. Type 1 diabetic, their pancreas stops making insulin, so they have to inject insulin. So our bodies, if your pancreas is working, is on autopilot. Your pancreas is constantly keeping your blood sugar levels normal. For a diabetic, they are trying to do that on their own, which is almost mind-blowing if you live with one or know one, to see the mental gymnastics that they're doing all day long.
Yeah, it's almost like you have a motor and you're tweaking the carburetor like constantly throughout the day or something.
Think about it. How do you explain a pernicious disease like this that lets you look and, in fact, be perfectly healthy most of the time, but that can strike you down at any moment?
Mm-hmm.
Today, we'll be talking with Maria Kellner, who is going to tell us what it's like living with type 1 diabetes, the things you never knew or thought to ask about. Thanks for joining us, Maria.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Good. Tell me about how you were diagnosed and how old you were.
I was 4 years old. I was, a young toddler, basically, and my mom is a nurse. She has been a nurse her whole career. And noticed that I was going to the bathroom a lot, drinking excessively, and I was having some sort of like mood swings that weren't necessarily normal for my character. So in preschool, my teacher was telling my mom, listen, she's really irritable. She's having a lot of tantrums. She's not quite acting herself. And, with weight loss, that's one of the early symptoms that a lot of type 1 diabetics have. So your blood sugar is very high. That makes you very thirsty. So you're drinking all the time. You're going to the bathroom all the time, and you're losing weight because your body essentially is like, burning all your fat cells. You don't have any sugar to burn, so it starts burning your fat cells.
Interesting.
So as a 4-year-old, you notice weight loss in a little kid pretty easily.
Right.
And when I say extreme thirst and urination, it's not like, drinking a lot throughout the day, like waking up multiple times during the middle of the night. One time I actually went into the fridge and pulled out an entire gallon of juice and opened it and tried to drink, and it spilled everywhere. So stuff like that, and multiple like wetting the bed. People who don't normally do that, or kids who are potty trained, when they start doing that could also be a sign.
I remember asking my husband when our children were younger and pointing out to him, Cece is drinking a lot. She is constantly drinking. Do you think she has diabetes? And he looked at me and he's like, no, you just don't get it. It's not just I'm thirsty. It's I cannot stop. I cannot quench my thirst. I cannot get enough of anything, water, juice, milk, and
very extreme.
Yeah. So how did your parents explain to you what was going on? I don't know if you remember, but do you have conversations about that?
So I don't remember a great deal of that. I know that my mom took me to my primary care doctor, and he said, I think this might be type 1 diabetes. You need to go to a specialty children's hospital, because we were in the St. Louis area at the time. So we went there, and I think for a lot of children or people who are diagnosed, that's really your first step after you notice that something is off. So we went to the hospital, and it's pretty much like a week stay or a couple of days stay, because they need to get your blood sugar levels regulated, and teach you or your caregivers how to do diabetes, which is not something you can learn in a couple of days, but they try their best.
Right.
So I don't remember a conversation about it when I was 4. I remember staying in the hospital. I remember my parents going to like a boot camp style class. So they'd be like gone at class for a while I was in the hospital. But yeah, I remember being angry. I didn't understand why people were coming in to poke my finger all the time or do injections. So I kind of remember that aspect, but I don't remember the conversation about here's what's going on and here's what diabetes is and means to you.
My husband was 16 when he was diagnosed. So that was way back in 1979. So I think they tested his blood sugar level by testing his urine back then. So that's how he would test it. But he said he distinctly remembers going to the hospital and the doctor coming in, and he remembers it as matter-of-factly, so you have diabetes. You're going to have it the rest of your life. This is the way it is from now on. But you can do it. If anyone could do it, you can do it. And he said his parents were kind of the same way, that this is the way it is. You're going to have to manage this the rest of your life, every day of your life, and take these injections of insulin and give yourself shots. And that's the way it is. And so his 16-year-old self was like, okay, this is what I got to do.
Yeah.
40 years later now, though,
Yeah, it seems like it would be hard to know, what you're getting into. If someone tells you that and you're 16, you don't know much about diabetes,
I think you're right. I think he went through a period in his life, in college actually, where he was, I don't have diabetes and I'm just going to ignore this. Of course, that doesn't work.
Yeah, I went through the same thing. I mean, because I don't think anyone is prepared to hear that, no matter what age you are, or even as a parent or a caregiver, to know that that's what your child is going to have to go through. I think it's I've compared it once to student loans. It's not the same, but you hear like, you're going to have student loans. You're going to take out this loan for a lot of money while you're at college. And you're like, okay, it's fine. Like, I know I have to pay it, whatever. And then when it starts happening, you're like, oh no, this is a lot of money and I really have to do this. And I think that's
interesting. Yeah.
It
doesn't probably hit you until a little bit later. You're like, okay, because it also, I think in that context, you're in the hospital for a couple of days. And like I said, you can't teach management in a couple of days, but they do their best to give you your tools. But I think there is a reckoning that happens later to understand what this really means. Because you kind of go into it at first as, this is how it is. You're going to have to take shots, but you can do it. You're just a normal person who has to manage their diabetes and do the job of a pancreas. And then when you understand what that really means, and the finality of it, for now, there is no cure. So the finality of it, I think, really takes a little bit to settle in.
Well, let's talk about the relentless decisions and management that you have to do as a type 1 diabetic. So I read somewhere that a type 1 diabetic makes 300 medical decisions a day, 365 days a year. So I was hoping you could help us walk through what some of those decisions are.
Absolutely.
Just, give us, I don't want you to give us 300.
Unless
you want to.
Are you sure?
Okay,
no, that's
number
fine.
1. Stay with us, everybody.
So, that has to be true because you just don't have an opportunity to not think about it unless it's a conscious decision which happens sometimes during burnout, like you mentioned your husband in college or myself in college. You don't want to think about it, so you don't. But that's extreme and it's dangerous. So if you are managing your diabetes and you're paying attention to it, you have to think about it all the time. I mean, it's the first thing I think about in the morning. And really, it kind of dictates how you plan your day. So if you want to exercise, you need to see if your blood sugar is in the right place. If it's too high, you need it to come down a little bit. If it's too low, you need to eat a snack and you need to wait. If it's just right, you probably still need to eat a snack and wait a little bit because exercise drops your blood sugar levels. So you have things like that. And then, of course, eating is the other big one because eating food raises your blood sugar. You need to take insulin, not only the right amount of insulin, but take it at the right time to really manage the impact that food is going to have on your blood sugar. So I think a great example of this is, in the before times when we used to go out and sit at a restaurant, when you would place your order, depending on what my blood sugar is doing, I need to kind of look at my options for timing and insulin delivery. So am I going to eat something that has a lot of carbs, like a burrito? And after I place the order, how long is it going to take for it to come? If I think it's going to take about 20 minutes, I'll take the insulin right away so it has time to start working. If the food comes faster or later than I expect, or if it comes and it's not right, they messed up my order, everything is a little tricky. So you need to have flexibility, but you also need to plan in a pretty intense way, which is difficult. Those two things don't always go together.
So the risk is if their blood sugar glows too long, say they miscalculate, make a mistake, they pass out, could have a seizure, pass out, go in a coma. If their blood sugar is too high, it's doing damage to their organs. And share with us what it feels like. My husband says it feels like I have the flu. And this is when your blood sugar gets like 300 and above. What does that feel like?
Yeah, so I think every diabetic has some things are standard across the board. Some things are very person to person. But for me, when my blood sugar is high, I'm very thirsty. There's, no amount of water I can drink to really quench that thirst. I'm usually exhausted, really tired. It's hard to focus, and I'm pretty irritable, just not really in a good mood. I don't feel well. And I think those are the major pieces of high blood sugar for me, symptom-wise.
And the low blood sugar can come on suddenly, correct? Talk to us a little bit about what it's like.
Yeah. So low blood sugar is scary for most people who experience it because when we contrast that to high blood sugar, your range for high blood sugar is really kind of a wide range between what your normal blood sugar should be and a high. And as Carolyn mentioned, it does, it's harming your internal organs. But besides feeling kind of crappy maybe or just not feeling well, the immediate effect is you can deal with it. It's not pleasant, but you can deal with it. Mm-hmm. A low blood sugar is not that way. A low blood sugar is really a kind of a medical emergency event if it gets too low, and it can happen fast. Your margin of error is much smaller. That range of low blood sugar is a lot tighter, but once you get in that range, it's a lot more dangerous. So loss of consciousness is something that can happen. For me personally, when I get low blood sugar, I have a really hard time concentrating. Like my mind kind of races and I can't focus on anything. I get really sweaty. I get shaky, like my legs feel weak. And that's what I would always, that was my like little kid way of saying that I had low blood sugar. I'd be like, my legs are low because, they just feel kind of weird. But those are the classic symptoms for me. So if it gets too low, you can sort of lose consciousness. You can, I've had situations where my husband and I call it the lights are on, but nobody's home, where I'm talking.
I know exactly
I was going to say, you know what this is. Where I'm talking, but I don't make any sense and I won't remember the things that I say, or I sort of know that I'm not really responding the way I want to be responding, but I can't do anything about it.
Right.
And then, if you get way too low, you lose consciousness completely and you can have a seizure, which is very scary. And that has happened to me a few times, but I think it can happen to any type 1 diabetic because, like I said, that margin of error when you get into the low blood sugar range is so, you just have a small window before things get pretty bad. So you have to be really on top of treating that low blood sugar, drinking the juice, whatever it is, in order to not dip too low.
You talked about the decisions that you're making throughout the day that are very impactful and necessary, but there's dozens of decisions that are less impactful that you're still making throughout the day. And I don't think people understand that either. Like, is my battery low for for the pump? Should I change it now, or what am I going to be doing later? But I'm so comfortable right now. I don't feel like getting up. And
I think there's a ton of other decisions that you have to make around diabetes and things you have to think about. Supply management is huge. Do you have the right amount of insulin if you're going out for the day? Do you have all the things you need in your purse? Do you have stuff for low blood sugar? Do you have extra pump supplies if you use an insulin pump? Do you have insulin? Do you have glucagon, which is like the life-saving medication if your blood sugar gets really, really low?
Right.
All of that stuff. So I say traveling or really leaving the house in general, and supply management is another big aspect of it. Because people looking at you can't tell that you're type 1 diabetic. It's an invisible disease. So you also have the dynamic in your relationships, whatever those may be, how much you're going to talk about it, how much, because it is really complex, it's really nuanced. So unless you live with diabetes or care for someone who has type 1 diabetes, you're not really going to fully understand all the nuance. But how far do you let your friends in? How far do you let your colleagues in? How much do you really need to explain it to your extended family? Or, whatever, you're in the grocery store and you're trying to talk to someone and your blood sugar is low and you aren't making any sense. So I think there's a lot of things happening in terms of decision making around that. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm always embarrassed. It happens in the grocery store a lot because I'm walking around so much.
I see. Yeah.
Especially if I'm looking for an ingredient or something and I forget where it is. And then someone, tries to talk to me or I try to ask someone a question and I just don't sound articulate or like myself or how I want to sound.
Right.
And yes, it's always embarrassing.
And you're asking for wine.
They're like, whoa, lady.
Yeah, you've had enough.
Yeah.
It sounds like the social aspect is a big part of it, and I know that you have diabetes because I've seen your pump and I've heard it beeping a couple times and stuff,
Yep.
and which to me is not. I don't feel like you need to be embarrassed about any of that stuff, but I was always thinking like, I wonder if that bothers her, But you always come across as extremely professional, and you're a very nice person, and so I assume like the social aspect of it is something that you're always also maintaining and managing. And
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I am now.
How long have you had it? I don't think we mentioned that.
So I've had type 1 diabetes for, it'll be 32 years in April.
Think about that. That's a long time.
It's a long time. So yeah, if you met me, 15, 20 years ago, I wouldn't have handled it this way. But yeah, I am more comfortable with it. I'm not embarrassed about I am like, I just tell the people that I sit next to, I'm kind of like a robot. I'm going to beep sometimes and you're going to hear it. I have alarms that sound scary. They're meant to save my life, but you don't need to worry. Like I'm on it. If I need help, I certainly will ask. Yeah.
So Jon used to be really embarrassed. Not that he had diabetes, but because when he was injecting insulin, he said, and sometimes he was always pulling up his shirt, and it takes a long time, or it takes some time to prepare a syringe. And, you're drawing out the insulin, and he often was doing it in a car, because of his job. He was often traveling in a car. But he was so embarrassed because he's doing it in parking lots, pulling up his shirt, sometimes close to his rear end, pushing a needle into his skin, and he's thinking, someone's going to think I'm a drug addict. Someone's going to think I'm a drug addict. And he's changed very much so over the years. He's more open about it now, especially since he's had the pump. But I'm wondering how you feel now about having diabetes in terms of, do you have days where, poor me, I wish I didn't have this?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, it is frustrating some days. There's days where you feel like nothing that I'm doing is working. Nothing is going right.
Yeah.
This really is hard. I have too much other stuff to think about today. I have work, I have my kid, I have whatever. And you don't want to deal with it, but you don't have a choice, because if you choose to ignore it, it's going to come back to bite you in the short term or the long term. So yeah, of course I get resentful some days.
Do you feel sometimes your self-esteem is linked to that number?
Yes. I try very hard. It's a thing I'm always working on to condition. Like, it's a number. It's not good or bad. It doesn't have like inherent value. The number is just really preparing you for the next step that you need to do.
She's talking about her blood sugar level.
Right.
Yeah.
So normal would be, we'll just say 100, 120 or 80 to 120, I think.
Yep.
So I know we've talked about this, and certainly Jon and I have, when you can't get your blood sugar within that range, and sometimes he takes it so personally.
Yeah. It's so frustrating.
You are literally doing the job of your pancreas.
Yeah.
Right.
Give yourself a break.
Right. And there's so many things, there's so many factors that influence blood sugar. So the easy thing is to just blame yourself. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm not doing it right. But you have all these other factors. There's environmental factors. If it's really hot outside, your blood sugar behaves a little differently than when it's cold. As a woman, if you're going through your menstrual cycle, that throws everything off. Stress incredibly affects your blood sugar. So, I always like to say that most things you can think of have some effect on your blood sugar. Adrenaline, especially. Adrenaline will hike it up if you're really excited or really nervous. And everything, including the moon phases, because sometimes there's nothing you can put your finger on that's causing the blood sugar to do whatever it's doing. And, when quote unquote nothing you're doing is working, it could be, most of the time, it's a mix of a lot of other factors besides the actions that you're taking.
Right.
Unknown ones,
Right.
often too.
Yeah.
I mean, when Jon would have episodes where either he had a seizure or passed out, we would backtrack together and say, okay, I did this, this, and this. I don't get it. And then he would bring some of these situations to his doctor, and he's like, you have diabetes. We're not going to know.
Yeah.
You know, there's so many nuances and little tiny things happening in your body that's, you know, affecting your blood sugar level that sometimes you just have to say, it's just never let your guard down. That's how I always feel like.
Yeah.
Never trust diabetes, because it never fails. As soon as Jon and I kind of like forget about it,
something happens.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's
and
funny.
you just have to be flexible. I think that's one thing that's kind of led me to the place where, okay, I'm not embarrassed about diabetes, and, you know, I try not to be too hard on myself, but it's something that is ever changing. So you need to be flexible. What worked yesterday is not going to work today. That just does not happen in type 1 diabetes management.
That's a good point.
You hope that you can get the tools that will help you manage to the best of your ability. And just when you get that blood sugar that's not what you want, instead of feeling guilty about it or blaming yourself, just looking at it as, here's an indication of what needs to do, and let's try to get it back in range, and move on. Because you have a lot of blood sugars every day, a lot of situations that you're trying to manage every day. And in the grand scheme of your life, that one blood sugar is like a tiny little moment. So pull back and look at the big picture when you can.
So in 1974, I read that they said a cure was 5 years away. And so here we are in 2020. How does that make you feel?
I think that it makes me feel somewhat frustrated. I wish that there had been more advancement toward a cure. But I will say, especially as someone who's had type 1 for a long time, the technological advances within my time being diagnosed have really been astounding. So things are coming along. A cure would be better, but the stuff that we have right now is so much better than what we had in the 70s, 80s, even the 90s, that those tools really help with type 1 diabetes management. So I'm very thankful for things like that.
That's a perfect segue into one of the reasons we're doing this episode today about type 1 diabetes. We encourage you to check out jdrf.org/onewalk. This is their campaign to find a cure for diabetes, and no cure has been found yet.
They're on a goal for 50 million, so if you can contribute anything, that would be great.
And our CEO, JP Gallagher, his daughter was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. I believe she's 15 now, and he certainly understands the importance of this fundraising campaign.
There you go.
All right, so check it out, jdrf.org/onewalk. Yes, it's for a good cause.
Raise some money.
Yep.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. You were an awesome guest.
Thank you for having me. It was great to be here.
Hey, if you have any topics that you'd like us to discuss, email us at publicrelations@northshore.org, and we'll be happy to get to those topics for you.
Or post a comment to Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram. Our handle on those platforms is @NorthshoreWeb. Thank you so much for listening.
And see you next time.